name on your screen, and and um, and then I'm going to just turn it right over to you, if that's okay.
Sure,
Um,
you bet.
yeah, well, good. Well, thank you so much for being here. So, welcome everybody on behalf of Capitol Hill Village, and I hope there are some folks from Hill East Civic Association as well who co-hosted this. I want to welcome Councilmember Kenyan McDuffie. Mr. McDuffie has been on the council for more than a decade now, and recently became an at-large council member, which means he's our council member too. He used to only serve Ward 5, or not only serve Ward 5, he's just focused on Ward 5, but he's been a champion for racial equity and really embedding structurally racial equity into the council processes and into the DC government. And it's one thing I know that he's very passionate about, and part of the reason why we have him here tonight to talk to us about his legislation on reparations. So, Councilman, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we were hoping that you would give us just a little bit of that kind of personal insight into what makes you tick. And
Sure.
I know you've been in Washington for a long time. I think maybe your whole life, and probably have some, along with some of these folks too. So I think it's going to be a good conversation. So over to you.
I really appreciate the introduction, Judy, and I appreciate the invitation to be with you all this evening. Everybody who's a member of the Capitol Hill Village, and of those of you who also are joining who aren't members. I look forward to this discussion, sharing a little bit about myself and about some of the legislation that I've passed on the council. And really just any feedback you all have, suggestions about things, how the city's going, and what, as your council member, one of your council members who represents everybody in the District of Columbia, how we can work together to make the District of Columbia a better home for all of us. And so just by way of background, as was mentioned, I have been on the council for quite some time. I actually got elected in a special election in 2012. I chair the council's Committee on Business and Economic Development. And I also have served as the council's chair pro tempore since being elected to that position by my colleagues in January of 2013 and every single council period since then. Briefly about my background, I have been in the District of Columbia, Judy, my entire life. I'm a fourth generation Washingtonian. My parents graduated from schools in the District of Columbia. My mom graduated from Western. My dad graduated from Bell Vocational. They both worked in government. My dad was an electrician for DPW in DC, and my mom was a library technician in the Library of Congress, where they both retired. And I grew up during the 1980s and 1990s in District of Columbia. And if some of you all were here during that time, you remember how tumultuous things were in the city. I won't even get into what the national news media referred to us, but the blue collar, working class neighborhood that I grew up in, which is technically a part of the Edgewood neighborhood in Northeast. But we call it Stronghold because that's what my dad and a bunch of his friends named the neighborhood after some sports teams that they had started when he was really young. And so I actually live in the home, and I'm seated right now in the home that my grandparents bought back in 1952. And so I'm the third generation of McDuffies to live here, and I live here with my wife, Princess, who was also born and raised in the District of Columbia, and our two daughters, Casey and Josie, who are 16 and 13. And if you all drive, then look out for my 16-year-old who just got her permit about a month and a half ago. But growing up in the district was a challenge, although I had a very nurturing environment in my home, and were instilled values early on about faith and family and really community education. It really was difficult to live during the 1980s and 1990s as a young Black man in the District of Columbia. And so I like to share that when I graduated from high school, which was then called Woodrow Wilson, it's now Jackson Reed, I actually didn't apply to a single college. I share that just because, today I'm a lawyer. I went to University of Maryland Law School. But way back then, I was not thinking about being a lawyer. In fact, I wasn't even thinking about, well, I thought about going to college, but I had two older brothers who had both gone to college. And by the time I got into 12th grade, they had both left college. And so I just wanted to get a job. DC in 1993 was not um, a place where 17-year-olds with just a high school diploma could easily get jobs, though. And I got that news the hard way. And so I struggled for a little bit, and I was really just trying to find myself, really losing hope in myself and our city. But everything changed for me about a year and a few months after high school when I got the opportunity to carry mail for the United States Postal Service. I had tried UDC twice just because my mother kept telling me I needed to do something since I couldn't get a job, and I dropped out both times. But when I got the job at the Postal Service, it really changed my entire life's trajectory. I carried out of the Friendship Station on Wisconsin Avenue. Even though I've been here my entire life, I for the first time saw places, along Loughborough Road, Holmes, Sibley Hospital, MacArthur Boulevard, parts of the city that I'd never seen before. And it really changed my perspective. Tragically, I lost two friends to gun violence in 1998, and it really was a seminal moment for me. It was that tragedy that gave me a different perspective about my life. Although I was doing pretty well for myself financially, and I had benefits, great job, and I had planned to be at the Postal Service for a career. Something changed when I lost my two friends within a matter of a couple of months of each other. And I actually made a tough decision to leave the Postal Service to go back to University of Columbia for the third time um, and pursue an education because I wanted to be more involved in my community. I wanted to really realize what I had an epiphany about after the tragic loss of my two friends. And that was that my destiny was not simply going to be defined by a job. It's going to be really inextricably linked to my ability to change the odds for people who were suffering around me in my community. And so I went back to the University of Columbia. I did really well the third time. I transferred to Howard University, ended up graduating in the top 5% of my class with a degree in political science, community development. I went on to be the president of my civic association in my neighborhood and worked for Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton on Capitol Hill, which also gave me a lens into government, how things worked and how decisions were made. And then I went on to law school. So I give you that sort of long, drawn out background because it really provides the sort of context for my tenure on the council and really gives you, I think, a view into how I have tried to use the policymaking process to make the District of Columbia a more racially equitable, more socially just, and more economically inclusive. I have passed a number of bills since joining the council. And I'll describe a few of them for you. And thinking about how to address some of the district's intractable issues, when I chaired the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety back in 2015, I authored a bill called the Neighborhood I think it's called the NEAR Act for short, but it's the Neighborhood Engagement Achieves Results Act. And we call it the NEAR Act for short because it's a really long name, but it really was a bill designed to usher in a public health-based approach to crime prevention and intervention, not to replace or supplement law enforcement because there's a role for the policing in the District of Columbia. But it was designed to really augment the work and try to prevent crimes before they happen by providing a public health-based framework for the executive that recognize that if you try to treat crime more as the disease it is in certain communities because it spreads if untreated, more like the epidemic that we've seen over the last few years. I work with people like Dr. Gary Slutkin, who founded the Cure Violence model. He's out of Chicago. He was indeed an epidemiologist. I work with people like Devon Bogan out of Richmond, California, where they had seen a significant drop in homicides. I work with a woman who started the Roca model out of Boston. I work with then council member, now mayor of Baltimore, on what some of the things that they had done, strategies, and it all manifested itself into the NEAR Act, which is has 20 titles and subtitles, and I won't go into all of them, but I will mention that it established the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, which identifies and recruits individuals determined to be at a high risk of participating in or being victims of gun violence and criminal activity, serious criminal activity. It's an evidence-based, data-driven model that includes counseling, mentorship, and workforce development, trying to connect those people to a pathway to success and to the workforce so that they can be productive citizens. Just last week, as a matter of fact, I had the opportunity to meet with the 14th cohort of the Pathways program, and I'm really grateful that our government has some of the resources it needs available to address violence as an epidemic and a health-based approach, and really give people the resources and the opportunity to really be productive citizens. I approach violence really thinking about two things: accountability on the one hand and opportunity on the other. We have to hold people who commit crimes accountable, and it's very important for our criminal legal system to work. If that people commit crimes, they are held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. It's important for victims, but it's also important for the community as a victim, and the impact that crime has on communities. But then after the accountability, we also have to look at the opportunity side of things, because there are a lot of communities in the District of Columbia that historically have been exposed to high rates of violence, who have lacked opportunities and really being confronted using the resources of government to meet them where they are, to expose them to those opportunities. I also like to tell you about the Child Wealth Building Act. We call it the Baby Bonds Law for short. Perhaps if you were following I think it was the 2020 election when Cory Booker was a part of that, and he basically his presidential campaign was really the crux of it was this baby bonds bill that has not passed on the federal government, but I passed, one of the first in the country. I drafted and my colleagues supported, and we passed unanimously at the council the Child Wealth Building Act. And I want to recognize how important it is for us to have an equitable distribution of economic resources and opportunity in a city that is a $20 billion budget, and the pressure that many of our residents feel from really being trapped in a cycle of generational poverty. And so the Child Wealth Building Act establishes trust funds for babies born into poverty in families who make up to 300% of the federal poverty level. And the program is really designed to have that accounts that are created when these kids are born, and these are accounts that are created automatically, that these parents don't have to necessarily opt into. The accounts accrue interest over the course of 18 years, and then at the age of 18, eligible children can withdraw the funds in those accounts to use them on things like education, either traditional academic college or vocational education, like the type that my dad got. Business ownership, business investment, residential commercial properties, the types of wealth building activity that so many families engage in. It really introduces, and it's not going to make these kids rich, but it's going to give them hope and really an economic hand up in the District of Columbia. I'm going to just talk about a couple more bills because I don't want this to turn into as much as a lecture as it is the opportunity for you all to learn about some of the things that I've worked on, and really hear your thoughts around some of the things that are going on in the city and how we can work together. The REACH Act, it actually stands for Racial Equity Achieved Results Act. If you catch the trend, I like to use some acronyms and make them easy for people to remember. So the Racial Equity Achieved Results Act, we refer to as the REACH Act. And I'm really proud of this bill. I believe it's going to have some real lasting impact in our city once it's fully implemented, both on the council side and the executive side. But it created an Office of Racial Equity within the executive office so that the mayor has that as a tool, the agencies throughout government has it as a tool, but it also establishes, and this is one of the things that we've gotten a lot of interest in from legislatures across the country, it established a council office on racial equity as well. The REACH Act really requires training of government employees around racial equity, members of boards and commissions. We got members of staff throughout the council and council members themselves trained around racial equity when we passed this bill. And although I recognize that racism isn't experienced the same way by every individual in the District of Columbia, or as it was experienced perhaps by some people years ago, and that we've made some really significant strides. There's certain institutional practices that have years ago contributed to some of the current inequities that exist that we really need to work hard to reverse in the District of Columbia. My expectation is that the REACH Act will help build a more solid foundation of checks and balances on all that we're able to do as a government to ensure that we are not causing additional harm. While we're working to chip away some of the legacy policies that have created some of the disparities that we see in our city, we also should not be doing additional harm along the way. And the REACH Act is really designed for government to look at its work through a lens of equity. And so I'm really proud of that bill. And then I'm going to get to one of the bills that Judy mentioned in her introduction, which is the Reparations Foundation Fund and Task Force Establishment Act of 2023. And it's a mouthful. And unfortunately, we don't have an acronym for that. So we call it the Reparations bill. But the purpose of this legislation is to look at the District of Columbia's laws, specifically laws that are in the code around the Department of Insurance Securities Regulation Establishment Act, to establish a task force to study and make recommendations as to the feasibility and development of reparations to Black Americans, African Americans, and the District of Columbia, and to require the creation of a slavery-era database of records relating to slaveholding to be used by the task force, and establish a foundation fund to provide funds for reparations. And perhaps this will be a question, and I don't want to try to preempt questions that I might get, but we are not, it's not etched in stone what ultimately this will look like. We had a great hearing earlier this year with lots of people who signed up to testify, including families of people who have been impacted by some of the racist policies, eminent domain and otherwise, that took land from some of our residents in the District of Columbia decades ago. And the reality is, that slavery, de jure, de facto segregation, and other government-sanctioned actions really contributed to denying wealth building opportunities to Black Americans, including District of Columbia residents. And today, we're still living with some of the consequences that resulted from those policy decisions a long time ago, in many instances before any of us were around. And the racial wealth gap, the educational achievement gap, the stark disparities in health, employment, the criminal justice system are in many ways a result of some of the intentional laws and policy decisions that deny Black residents the right to some very basic needs and some very basic and necessary opportunities. And so the notion that with hard work, everyone in our country has an equal opportunity to succeed and achieve the American dream just is not the reality for all of us. And I think we might be able to agree on that. And I think thinking about where we are today, we can recognize the progress that we've seen, but also how far we have to go to have a more equitable city. And so we've got to be intentional, I think. And that's been my approach, intentionality in our efforts so that our residents of color generally, but Black residents in particular, might finally have some policies that look to compensate them for some of the policies that existed long before we were here, but that have continuing effects in our city. And so, Judy, I am going to be coming to a close so we can open this up, but I want to just lay out one data point that maybe some of you all know. It's been widely reported in the news, but we have one of the starkest racial wealth gaps in the District of Columbia of any city in the United States. The median wealth of white families in the District of Columbia is 81 times the median wealth of Black families in our city. And that is a statistics that will not get reversed on its own. It's really going to take a city recognizing where we are and what types of policies it's going to take to try to address it. It's not going to happen overnight because these where we are today and some of the results and disparities that exist are not the result of things that happen overnight. And so it's going to take us working collectively and cooperatively. It's my hope, and I'm very optimistic, which you'll get to know once you know me. I'm a glass half full kind of elected official. I believe that we can all achieve some of the positive things that we set out to do. And I appreciate you all inviting me again to be a part of this evening's conversation. And I look forward to engaging in a dialogue. Again, happy to share any answers to any questions that you all might have and to get you all any answers that I'm not able to answer tonight. So I'm going to stop right there, Judy, again, to say thank you and look forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you so much. Just as a logistical thing, I can see everybody on the screen, I think. So if you want to just raise your hand like this, you can, or you can use your reactions tab and select raise your hand, and then that's another way to do it. But open it up for questions, comments.
You can also type your question in the chat if you have a question, and we'll be happy to read it.
Well, does anybody have a question? Because I've got one that I can kick off with, which is, first of all, thank you. I have such deep respect for the work that you've done, through your work on the council on racial equity, I think has been really incredibly powerful. I'm wondering if this moment in time, when any sort of when civil rights are being rolled back, when any mention of race as a factor in policy is being challenged as unconstitutional, I'm just wondering how you're feeling about the possibilities, potentialities of the kinds of legislation that things that you've already done and things that you want to do. It just feels like a very scary time, and I'd love to hear a glass half full kind of person talk about it.
No, I appreciate that. Look, ultimately, I think we live in a society where, despite many of the headlines that we read in the paper, despite a lot of the things that we see in the news, we have lots of things in common, right? I think people want to live in safe communities. They want to, if they have families with kids, they want to have a quality education, preferably in walking distance of where they live for their kid. They want to live in housing that is both affordable and safe. And they want to have meaningful careers. And I think in our society today, we spend far too much time talking about things that we don't agree on and not nearly enough time talking about the things that we have in common. And so I think that's important just in terms of context. And frankly, one of the reasons I'm a glass half full kind of person is because, when I'm out, campaigning or knocking on doors or going to meetings like this, it really is an opportunity to hear from people directly. I don't even watch as much news as I used to because I feel like a lot of what we are seeing today is more about clicks and selling ads than it is about, just reporting on things that are happening around the country and ways that we move forward. And so the Supreme Court has not been sending as much news down of late that has been encouraging. I think that, in terms of where we are with affirmative action, where we are with civil rights. What I didn't mention in my bio is that I actually spent some time in the Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division where I investigated jails, prisons, mental health facilities, juvenile justice facilities, making sure the conditions were constitutional. We really enforced what's called the CRIPPER Act, the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act. I also investigated police departments where there were allegations of a pattern or practice of misconduct. For those of you all who are DOJ alum or maybe know some people who work there, my section was the special litigation section. It's a really small section within the Civil Rights Division, but it's some of the most fulfilling work that I've ever done. That being said, I think we have to be thoughtful and innovative about how we are making policy so that it has a lasting impact. Despite whether or not you agree with the recent Supreme Court decision about affirmative action programs in colleges and universities, I think we can agree that kids and students in the United States should have the opportunity to pursue their dreams by attending college, recognizing the economic challenges that many kids face of all different backgrounds, races, nationalities, ethnicities. We should be doing everything we can to arm students with the resources to attend college. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to recognize what the decision says, what the holding means, and what we might be able to do to try to level the playing field for students who want to attend college. And so one of the things that's come up recently, and frankly, I can't take a lot of credit for this, but my daughter's even thinking about working with some young folks, is how you use the application process, specifically the essay portion of the application, to really tell your story in a way that anybody who's a part of the admissions committee really gets a full sense of who you are, including race, if that is your preference, and that's the story you want to tell. And so I've spent my work thinking about, ways. I don't have all the answers yet. In fact, if there's anybody on this Zoom who has some answers, I'm interested to hear it. But what ways that states, counties, municipalities, and folks at the local level can pivot and make policies or laws that address those decisions so that the rights, or I don't even use the word rights, the opportunity and the dreams that young people have of attending college can be fulfilled. And I think in a country with the amount of wealth that we have, we should be able to do that. And whether it is more work at the federal government level through Pell Grants and other resources, but I'm not going to hold my breath that we can depend on Congress to do this. I didn't hold my breath when I heard Cory Booker and other members of Congress talk about baby bonds. I legislated it, and my colleagues and I supported it and funded it. When unfortunately we encountered last year, the mayor's budget was more lean, and she actually cut funding for the baby bonds program. I did fret initially, but I just thought about ways to overcome those obstacles. And what was a $32 million program when we initially funded it in 2021 was now a $54 million budget gap. I worked with my colleagues, and we found the money, and we funded it. And I want to give Trevor Mendelson a shout out because I work really closely with him to make sure we can identify the $54 million in the budget. And so the short answer is I am hopeful that states, municipalities, localities around the country can make policy that try to compensate for some of the things that are happening on the federal level, be it the Supreme Court or Congress, all the same.
Thank you. Shirley, I see your hand up. You're on mute too. So.
Thank you, first of all, for being here. Really appreciate your practical approach to our problems. So I'm going to say the thing that everybody's on everybody's mind, and it's crime. And with your practical approach and your experience and love for the city, the people on this call love the city, have committed to the city. But as you know, perceptions become realities. And we're in a situation now where longtime residents become fearful, and people who are attracted to the city for its vibrancy and all that it's offered are stepping back, that we're retreating to our whatever. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how do we revert? There are long-term solutions, But people, this negative perception, which affects, frankly, your ability, our ability to fund the programs that are so important because our tax revenues go down. Can you come up, do you have one or two things that could be accomplished within the next year, for example, that would help to assuage people that not only are our leaders interested, but they have practical solutions or practical approaches?
Absolutely, and thank you for that question, Shirley. I started off mentioning that I've been here my entire life. I think just as I answer this question, I want to give you a little context. When I told you all I graduated high school, didn't apply to college, but yet I couldn't find a job. My thing was go get a job, can you? Well, me and my best friend took the metro to every single metro stop that had a mall within walking distance, and we applied to every single job that said they were hiring, and we could not find jobs. I took the civil service test at the DC Armory. We could not find jobs. I used to be afraid to talk about this stuff, but I made a bunch of horrible decisions from the time I was 17, 18, and until I got that job at the Postal Service. And I watched my friends make a bunch of horrible decisions. And those young men primarily, some women, but men primarily, made a bunch of horrible decisions because they didn't see the opportunities to be able to be contributing citizens. And I'm not making excuses. There needs to be consequences when people commit crime. And we have to start by saying that because there are far too many crimes of violence happening in the District of Columbia. And there are far too many young people who are committing crimes as if they have impunity. And it's a problem. And I want to just name it so that it's clear. What I am doing, in addition to the things I've already done, is talking to the Metropolitan Police Department about what quality community policing looks like in neighborhoods across the District of Columbia, in communities plagued by violence, in communities that have business corridors where some people are really preying on residents and visitors alike, so that we can increase the deterrent effect in these neighborhoods. In fact, I was communicating with the chief of police today. I spoke to the assistant chief about the horrible homicide that occurred in the 1300 block of 8th Street at Crew Lounge this weekend, because I care about those crimes and I want to know what they're doing to address it, how they're going to solve it. But I will tell you, closure of cases, the Metropolitan Police Department making arrests, closing cases, handing it off to the U.S. Attorney's Office, who charges these crimes, prosecutes these crimes, hands them off to judges who sentence these offenders within the bounds of the law, is how the system should function. And making sure the system function has been my chief priority. And it's a short-term approach to what we're doing. Increase community policing, right? Which I know a little thing about because, I've been around the country providing technical assistance in my prior career to police departments. So I know what it looks like. I will tell you this, Shirley, and I'm going to stop. And what Jonathan's going to do, Judy, is make sure that I'm not too long-winded in my answers. But in the short term, we also need to make sure that the Metropolitan Police Department has the resources and the staffing to put officers on the street. Now, this is where the balance comes in. Right? This is not a shot at MPD, but what you'll hear from the Metropolitan Police Department when you talk to them, and I'm not just talking about the brass, because I also talk to officers routinely, detectives, and everybody at every level. You'll hear that there are officers who are in fear for their jobs because they feel like the council doesn't care about them and doesn't support them, and they don't want to be fired. Right? What you'll see are officers in cars, in their patrol cars, but not as much as you'd like to see it, outside of their cars, walking their beats, getting to know residents by name, getting to know the shop owners, right? Stopping in for a cup of coffee, a donut, whatever. We need to see more of that. And if there is a problem with this chief, whose nomination is going to be heard this week, with doing that, then let's identify the problem and let's identify a quick fix, because that needs to happen like yesterday. So in the short term, increasing visibility, the deterrent effect, really changing the conversation and the dialogue around what it means to have safe communities, right? Because community safety is going to be different depending on who you are and where you live and perhaps your experience in the city. Putting that aside, then you have to make sure that you're giving individuals across the District of Columbia what they need to feel safe, because people with means who can leave will leave. Small businesses with means who can leave will leave. Corporations with means who can leave and feel like they'll be better and their employees will be safer in another place will leave. And what I don't want is for us to go backwards like it was in the 80s and 90s when, as a young 17-year-old, I could not get a job in this city.
Go ahead, Shirley. Go again. Yeah.
If I may, thank you very much for that. And just one personal insight. I love seeing the cops on bikes. That gives me so much. I just feel so supported when I see the cops on bike in our neighborhood. And that even if they can't stop, at least you know they're there and looking for us. Thank you.
Yeah. And while you're looking, I don't know if you have another question, Judy, but what they'll also say, Shirley, is that they're getting so many calls for service that if I get out of my patrol car to walk my beat, before you know it, I've got to hop back in to respond to a call for service. I want to acknowledge that, name that, because I've heard that from officers too. And when I say we have to assess the problem, I mean, where is the kink in the hose, right? Let's fix the kink in the hose and get it flowing so that we feel safe as residents, regardless of where you live, and that we are holding people accountable who commit these crimes. While on the other hand, in these communities, with these young folks, like I was yesterday at this high school, at this grade school, charter school, where they lost 4 students to gun violence last year. In 1 year, they lost 4 students, right? And I spent a little time with 2 of the students whose siblings were of the 4 who passed away. I'm going to show up for those kids, and I'm going to talk to them, and I'll make sure that they know they have a champion working for them in City Hall.
Thank you. Yeah, Judy.
I don't really have a question. I just want to thank you so much for enlightening us for everything you're doing. You sound like an incredibly hardworking council member, and I support you. I wish I could think of an obvious way that I could support you. Some of us on this call have been participating in an anti-racist reading group for the last 3 years. So we've been thinking about these issues a lot. Again, we talk and think about it, but finding solutions is difficult, as you have pointed out. Mm. But thank you so much. I'm very impressed with you, and it's very nice to put a face with a name.
Thank you, Judy. I appreciate it. I'll tell you, some of the work that I do, I'm proud to say that a lot of the bills that I've passed at the council have been supported unanimously. By my colleagues. I think about reparations, which is one of the things that Judy wanted me to talk about with you all this evening. And, talking about race is not always comfortable. In fact, it's frequently uncomfortable. You bring it up and people tend to recoil and they, if it's not done in a way that's thoughtful, perhaps facilitated, it's less productive than you want it to be. I mentioned that because I had a staffer, Donnie Crawford, who's working on this, and she's so passionate about this work. But she mentioned the Tax Revision Commission and whether we should try to do something with it. And I said, Donnie, we have been working hard at this, but I don't know that we've gotten to the point where this conversation around reparations has gone beyond the policy wonks and the people who testify at council hearings and the folks who perhaps have a sense of history, but aren't ready for it on a local level, right? And I mentioned that because honestly, some of the things that you all can do if you are supportive of things like reparations at the local level, or even not at the point of support, but are more are interested in trying to see the conversation move beyond the hearing that we have and maybe closer to getting passage. We need allies. We need allies, and frankly, we need, we need allies that aren't Black people. We need allies who want to have this conversation, want to move it beyond a conversation to policy, and are helping us think about ways to actually implement this. Because one of the things she mentioned was taxes. Well, that's a tricky subject, right? I didn't support the income tax increase a couple of years ago. Not because I didn't think the tax code needed some reform. I recognize that a lot of what we do locally is tethered to the federal tax code. I also recognize that, we had a $500 million surplus locally and $3 billion in federal aid. And I didn't think we needed to raise income taxes in that environment. Whether or not you agree with me, here we are today talking about ways to address taxes during much leaner times. And so if that's something that you all are supportive of, or anybody on this Zoom and would like to have additional conversation about how you can be helpful, then please let us know. Let Jonathan know so we can engage with you all.
I think many of us would be interested.
Awesome.
I see Susan's hand. Did I also see you, Karen?
Yeah.
Yeah. How is Susan and then Karen? Okay.
Do you have a timeline or a project plan, so to speak, for moving ahead on the reparations bill, about what doing a phased approach or however that is?
We have not gotten there yet. There's a coalition of advocates who have been super supportive, who've been helpful. And what I'd love to be able to do, Susan, is to maybe follow up with some more specifics from Donnie on my team. But we were talking about that today, and I don't have a timeline. I mean, our council periods are 2 years, and the council period started, this 2-year council period started in January of this year, and it won't end until December 31st of 2024. And so that is really the frame within which I am working. I'd like to be able to have a markup in our committee this year, but I'm just going to be totally candid with you all. I don't know if politically we are there yet. And I don't want to feel like we're forcing something on people who have not been a part of this conversation, who couldn't take off to participate in a hearing at the council, even though we did it a little later to try to accommodate as many people's schedules as possible. I'm just really trying to be considerate of how huge of issue this is and how, frankly, divisive it's been in this political climate to even talk about things like reparations in the District of Columbia or otherwise. And so I don't have a concrete time frame. We have already had a hearing. We could schedule a markup literally under the council's rules within 24 hours. But Donnie's working hard on making modifications with the input of residents and others who would like to see some tweaks to the bill as it stands today. And if you all have suggestions or ideas, I'm happy to hear them, and we're happy to try to work with you all to incorporate them into what we're doing.
Thank you, Karen. And then did I see Fran? Did you have a? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDuffie. I'm so impressed with what you're doing and with your pragmatic approach. I moved on to near the corner of 10th and Constitution in 1991. And one of the first things I remember was I heard a bunch of pans banging outside my window and a lot of hollering. And I looked out and there was this little band of people coming down Constitution with big signs that said reparations now. And I thought, oh my God, what planet are they living on? It's never going to happen. And today, I have spent actually the last 3 years working with reparations groups all around the country, and mostly with individuals through an organization called Coming to the Table, where the descendants of enslavers and enslaved people are coming together and putting together family reparations programs, scholarships, and things like that. But the process of doing this has brought a lot of, somewhat moderate to conservative white people into the reparations fold for national and state reparations. So I think there may be a lot more of that going on at the grassroots level than you might be aware of. And, you know, I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you is if your reparations bill or any of the other really good bills that you've passed address the problem that that has always concerned me of policy. I was reading an article in today's Washington Post about Bancroft School and how low-income students are losing their funding because the level of well-to-do students are moving in because of gentrification. So there are all these kind of autocratic rules that hurt low-income students when gentrification occurs. And is there some way that some of your programs are addressing that or can deal with that?
That's a great question. To the first part of your comment around reparations, and I really appreciate that because I'm encouraged whenever I hear that more people are having this conversation, and the fact that more, like you said, conservative white people are talking about this means that more people are going to be knowledgeable about what's going on and the impact of reparations, and frankly, hopefully the shared benefit that would accrue to jurisdictions that adopt reparations policy. And I think I mentioned that there's a 9-member task force that the bill would establish. And so one of the things I do want to emphasize about what we're doing, and one of the reasons I do feel still optimistic about passage, is because the bill would establish a reparations task force that really brings experts together to craft ultimately what the policy looks like, right? My mother thinks I'm a really smart guy. My wife thinks I am probably half the time. And my kids wonder why the heck, I don't know as much as I should on social media. But I think I am smart enough to recognize that having experts work on this and really call together some of the best practices of what's been done around the country, what works, what doesn't work, is probably the best approach to getting legislation that is implementable and that will probably garner the widest support in the city. And so that I want to just make sure that you all are aware of that. Although we're working a lot, we're working hard to get a bill and get it passed, there still would be a lot more work to be done to actually get us to the point where we know what reparations would look like, how it would be funded, who would benefit, who would get it. A lot of that work would still be done, and I wouldn't want to preempt that work happening. On the part of your question around schools and the impact of gentrification on certain schools, I was actually at Minor Elementary today. It's over on 15th, I think, in it might be like G Street. And we work with Coca-Cola. They donated a bunch of backpacks. I talked to the principal for a while. He's a person who grew up in the city, graduated from Calvin Coolidge High School. And one of the questions I asked in the brief time that we had together was, because I actually expected, Karen, that there would be far more non-Black students at Minor, given the amount of gentrification that we've had. And I think he said that he has a significant amount of at-risk students at the school because gentrification has had an impact. But in his school, at least, it is still in the pre-K 3, pre-K 4, maybe K classes, but that parents will pull their kids after the first few years and make different decisions, whether they're moving to different parts of the city for a school that they better fits their kids' needs, or whether they're moving out of the city. And so that effect that gentrification has still is significant on these schools. But what it means, and frankly, is that we have lots more work to do, because I think going back to why we're doing reparations and some of the legacy policies, I mentioned the racial wealth gap. we still have one of the most racially segregated cities of any city in America. You know, I think you all know this, the farther west we go, the whiter and the wealthier it gets. The farther east we go, the poorer and the blacker it gets. And although there are a lot of families, including my own, that make decisions about their kids who live in Northeast or mid-city about where to send their kids, if they don't have the confidence or that the neighborhood school is the best fit, they're still making decisions to send their kids west of the park, right? And we don't very often see families who live west of the park send their kids east of the park for school. And that means something in a city like ours. Really, that I think its strength and a lot of it's what attracts people here is the beautiful diversity that exists, right? It's the opportunity that exists to go to world-class universities and colleges and to live in a beautifully diverse city, the seat of the federal government. So, we are addressing issues through funding around at-risk students, trying to make sure that there's more transparency around the public school budget so that parents understand it, students understand it, people in the education community understand it, so that the money follows the kids that need it most, so that those disparities don't exist where you have PTAs that can raise in one night, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 that supplement the things that are happening inside the schoolhouse. We're also working to recognize that in some schools, these kids come into the school building with challenges that make it difficult for teachers to do their jobs effectively. And in many cases, it has nothing to do with their ability to learn as individuals, but everything to do with the conditions within which they live and the lack of resources that they have in their communities.
Yeah.
So interesting, because it's the school funding policy seems to be premised on segregation, right? I mean, it's sort of as a federal policy, which of course exists, so you have to deal with it, but it's also like then you have these, outcomes like what Karen's talking about. It's sort of interesting. Sorry. Fran, you had a comment? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute. I also just want to point out we've got just 5 minutes left.
Okay, I'll make it quick.
No, you don't have to make it quick. I just want people to know if you have a question, now's the time. Raise your hand.
Is it only 5 minutes left already?
I'm just reminded my grandchildren went to minor, and I observed what you're talking about, is that the lower grades, the pre-K and all that, were integrated. And as we went up, the classes were more and more segregated. And frankly, it was a discouraging thing, and it's very much a Capitol Hill thing. We can see it in all the elementary schools around us. And it's pretty, for those of us who have grandchildren in the Capitol Hill schools, it's pretty discouraging. And I don't know, I don't have any solution for it, but people peel off and go mostly actually people go to private schools. That's been my experience. Yeah. I'd also say I certainly can't speak for the organization, but I can say for some of us who read the big book on reparations in our anti-racist reading group, we read the Garrity book from North Carolina, which is really gets into the weeds, but it's a really wonderful book. I think I can say for myself and some others here that we are people in the city who would certainly support some kinds of reparations, and we've been paying attention to what other municipalities in the country are doing. So we're really eager, I think, to see what DC is going to do, and I think we'll really be supportive of what you all decide.
No, I appreciate that. I made the point earlier about minor elementary and just how segregated we are, to say something that I didn't mention, which is a lot of the disparities we see in these schools. I mean, you track housing policy and you get these concentrations of poverty, and then you look at the schools. It's no wonder why you see the challenges that exist in certain schools in certain parts of the city. Where there is gentrification, the early years are one thing. As you get into, first, second, third grade, a lot of parents lose confidence in the ability of their kids to get a quality education. And it leaves, in many cases, it leaves schools with, students that have similar challenges, I'll put it that way. Again, not to say that they can't learn, I believe they can learn, but it means that we have to recognize if we want to fix our education system, then we have to fix housing. If we want to fix our education system, then we have to fix the high levels of unemployment in certain parts of our city. We still have double-digit unemployment in Ward 8 in the District of Columbia. And then lastly, because I know we're running short on time, I'll say I'm a big fan of Professor Darity and his wife, in fact, and they both actually testified at the reparations hearing that we had. We had a number of true rock stars in their professions who took the time to testify. And we have a really robust hearing record as a result of the work that we've done thus far in reparations.
Well, go ahead. Brenda, do you want to say something else?
No, I just wanted to thank him.
Oh, okay. Well, I think, yeah, you can thank him for all of us. This has been really delightful, getting a chance to speak with you. I do think, I mean, this is a group that really is interested in racial equity and in becoming better allies, I think, to the Black community in DC.
Yeah.
And so I do hope that as things develop, that you will, look to us, for whatever we can offer. I know we'll be having further conversations about this and about other, about reparations and other issues. So I want to thank Susan Sedgwick and Joanna Candig for helping, for inviting, for coming up with this, for the topic for tonight, and to your staff for helping pull it together, and Kosi, who's snuck in here and is hiding, for being here too. So with that, I guess I will just say thank you, and I really do hope the conversation continues.
Thank you. The conversation will continue, and I look forward to you all being a part of it. We got a lot of work to do, but we have made significant progress, and I look forward to making even more progress with the folks who are on the Zoom. You all enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everybody. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.